And welcome to the museum's Night TV studio. I'm Jan Newhart, the Chair and Chief Executive Officer of the Freedom Forum. It's been a special day here at the museum with the unveiling of the Alice Allison Dunnigan sculpture, a wonderful tribute to this pioneering journalist who was the first African-American woman to shatter the glass ceiling of the National Press Corps in Washington, D.C., and receive press credentials to cover the White House, Congress, and the Supreme Court. The location of the sculpture in our Make Some Noise exhibit, which celebrates other pioneers in the fight for racial equality, is fitting, since throughout her career, Alice Dunnigan battled the rampant racism and sexism that dominated the mostly white and male professions of journalism and politics. Today, we are so pleased to be joined by a number of people who can talk more about the life and the work of Alice Dunnigan. Carol McKay Booker is the author of the 2015 book, Alone Atop the Hill, which is an updated and annotated edition of Dunnigan's self-published 1974 autobiography. Carol is also the wife of the late legendary civil rights journalist Simeon Booker, who was inducted into the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame in 2013, the same year as Alice Dunnigan. We are also joined today by Amanda Matthews, the artist who created this beautiful bronze sculpture. Amanda is the CEO of Prometheus Art Foundry located in Lexington, Kentucky, and has designed and created several public works, including bronze monuments and portraits. We are so pleased to also be joined by Soraya Dunnigan Brandon, who is the youngest granddaughter of Alice Dunnigan, and like her grandmother, is an educator and journalist. Currently, Soraya is an educator in the Durham, North Carolina public school system. We are in good hands this afternoon with our moderator, Sonia Ross. Sonia is the race and ethnicity editor for the Associated Press and a former White House reporter for the AP. It was Sonia who nominated Alice Dunnigan for the NABJ Hall of Fame in 2013. Sonia tells us she nominated Dunnigan because she felt her accomplishments were too significant for her to languish in anonymity any longer. Along with Soraya, we are so honored to be joined by other members of Alice Dunnigan's family in the audience today, as well as several sisters from her sorority, Sigma Gamma Rho. At this time, please join me in welcoming Deborah Catching-Smith, International President of Sigma Gamma Rho.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this distinct honor and indeed a privilege to stand before you on such an auspicious occasion as this, the dedication of a statue to commemorate our sorority sister, Alice Allison Dunnigan. I bring you greetings from the undeniable women of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, many of whom have traveled from across the country to be here today. If my sorors and my sisters would please stand and be acknowledged. Thank you. We also want to give special acknowledgement to one of our past presidents, national presidents, Dr. Menor J. Bryant, who is with us here today, who lives in the D.C. area, and we are so glad that Dr. Bryant could join us. If you could stand, Dr. Bryant. We have many with us from our International Board of Directors who have traveled from across the country on this magnificent occasion. Our Executive Director from our International Corporate Headquarters located in Cary, North Carolina. If she would please stand, Cynthia Eubanks. Also, we have our Regional Director who is with us as well, Thomasina Gore from North Carolina. And then we have our international historian who flew in from Los Angeles, California, and her name is Tamika Williams-Clark. Thank you so much. When the word spread amongst our sisterhood about this amazing acknowledgement and honor to Alice Allison Dunnigan, we were just overjoyed and elated. Yes, another hidden treasure is now being displayed to the world. We know that this is the stage where we have an opportunity to encourage, inspire, and promote what accomplishments that Alice Dunnigan made as a trailblazer in the world of journalism. The news media, as we all know, is currently under attack by this administration. Supporting the fourth estate, which is the media, does not reflect a political bias or a nonpartisan effort. It is to protect what is provided in the United States Constitution, freedom of thought and expression provided by the First Amendment. And Sigma Gamma Rho stands today in support of that obligation of our nation to honor the right to free speech and free press. Throughout her career, Alice was a tireless advocate to inform and educate. She stood there without a free press. Individual freedoms are under attack. She understood the ethical journalism and freedom of thought and expression that are essential to our democracy. We believe that Alice joined Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated because of the sorority's mission aligned with her own mission. The racism and gender bias she faced was prominent not only in journalism, but in our society in its totality. She epitomized leadership as a journalist, civil rights activist, and an author. She was intentional and impactful. We, the women of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, stand with the Newseum leadership and the Freedom Forum to announce our support for journalists who boldly seek the truth, focus on the facts, and hold government and business and other institutions accountable. Alice's perseverance and all that she has accomplished is merely an inspiration to all of us. The celebration of her accomplishments here today to the field of journalism and the world is simply amazing. We want to thank the Newseum staff and leadership for this acknowledgement of our member. We also want to shout out John Maynard for his phenomenal partnership with Sigma Gamma Rho. Let's give John Maynard a round of applause. And now I would ask the women of Sigma Gamma Rho to please stand as we honor and acknowledge two phenomenal leaders of the Newseum. Ms. Jan Newharth, Chair and Chief Executive Director, Officer, and Ms. Patty Rule, Vice President of Exhibits at the Newseum. If you ladies would both come forward. We would like to honor the Newseum. If you'll join me on the stage, ladies. Okay, good. Thank you. Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated salutes the Newseum and the Freedom Forum for your dedication to free press, free speech, and free spirit, and for recognizing our sorority sister, Alice Allison Dunnigan, journalist, civil rights activist, and author, on this day, September 21st, 2018. Okay, we'll step around this way. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. Thank you again. You may be seated. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I am very excited to be here. As they said to you earlier, my name is Sonia Ross. I am currently race and ethnicity editor for the Associated Press, a former White House correspondent, and chair of the Political Reporting Task Force for the National Association of Black Journalists. I nominated Alice in 2013 for the NABJ Hall of Fame because of the significance of her contributions. And to me, they struck me as the type of significant things that we black women do all the time. We hold it down for the world. And I felt that her moment to shine had come. Before we get into our amazing discussion about this amazing lady, I'd like to take a minute to recognize Mrs. Dunnigan's family. There are a significant number of her family members here, and would you all just stand to be recognized for your grand relative? All right. As I think about the era in which Alice Dunnigan did all these wonderful things in the field of journalism, it's almost difficult to comprehend that she was able to pull these things off, dealing with the dual burden of race and gender bias in her field, in her daily life, in American society. And so before we get into our discussion about the great things that she did, I thought I would share a few direct quotes from Alice herself, because it's nice for her to be heard in this setting. When she was discussing her first day at the White House in the wonderful book that Carol Booker brought to life for us. She described the scene of watching all the various male reporters waiting for the day to begin. And some of them acknowledged her presence, some of them did not. So, of those who spoke to her, she shared this. When I proudly responded that I had been accredited to the White House press corps, they extended a casual congratulation, implying this was no big thing. To them, it was nothing unusual because white reporters with reputation and status had always been accredited to the White House. But for me, it represented progress for my race, recognition of the black press, consideration of women reporters, and a personal honor because I was the very first woman of my race ever to receive such accreditation. Carol, if I can come to you on this, and with that I'll move to this chair so we can have this discussion. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. All right. Carol, I want to throw it to you to talk about the significance of this and Alice Dunnigan as a visionary. She clearly had her mind set on things beyond where she was in that moment.
She clearly did. I wonder, just for example, this is something I've never talked about before, but the statue shows her holding the Washington Post, and a headline is on civil rights. There were no black reporters on the Washington Post, and wouldn't be until 1951, so at least 3 years later, when my husband was the first black full-time staff reporter. But look where he came from. He had a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard. That was nothing to sneeze at. Alice had fought her way through her whole education. She had worked as a teacher, not as a reporter on a northern newspaper like the Cleveland Call and Post, or even Baltimore Afro-American. She really came up the hard way. But why would she stand there with the Washington Post in her hand? I think she was saying, maybe someday. And she was a visionary. She could see where we were going. You had to be in order to put up with all of the hardships she put up with. You know, having to pawn her watch, the only thing she had of any value, in order to eat on weekends until the paycheck came in. And the stories she covered, she was in the true tradition of the black press. You knew you were part of the story. There was no way to say you're uninvolved. You were part of the story just because you were a black person and you were writing about something affecting black people. But she wrote with a heart. Some people would say, oh, she got too emotionally involved. No. Her readership loved her, and she was a headline maker in more than 100 black newspapers across the country and another dozen or so in Africa. And I'll let somebody else talk now because I've talked long enough.
When you think about that word visionary, and Amanda, when you were creating the statue that we see out in the foyer there, how much did you hear from Alice? How much of the actual Alice Dunnigan did you feel channel through you into the art that you were creating on her behalf?
That's a wonderful question, because that's exactly how the creative process works, and that is to try to be a conduit to the world and represent the person not just in their likeness, but to also convey their importance, to convey their sense of accomplishment. And in particular with this sculpture, and the book as well, it really did help give me a sense of her struggle. And I felt like that the sculpture showing her standing on the Capitol steps was significant because it also showed that she had a national impact. As far as the sculpture in particular goes, I also wanted to convey a true sense of her shape and her form. I think that a lot of times in sculpture, the form is romanticized and it's not realistic. And I really wanted to show her likeness as well as her personality.
So, Soria, of course, this then comes to you, to the world. Alice Dunnigan was a reporter covering presidents, the reporter who the president ignored for 2 years. For you, she was your grandmother. She was the lady in the kitchen making the sweets that you like to eat. You know, the things that all people remember and think about with their grandmothers. Can you share with us what Alice Dunnigan, your grandmother, was like?
What you saw is what we saw, but when she was with family, the way that she portrayed, she educated us on what her world was like. She was a great storyteller. And I could just sit at her feet and listen, because the way she wrote, she spoke that way. She wrote the way she spoke in a way that there was always imagery. And she could pull you into the stories and pull you into, you could feel like, wow, I want to meet this person, or wow, really, Grandma? You know, and so that is what I remember about my grandmother in the vision. I was not, I was 23 when she passed, but one of the things that I appreciate so much is that as a college student at Howard, majoring in journalism, we became very close because I had the skill, but she helped me tweak the craft. And so she could often give me a point of view that I would not have had for one, because of my age, and two, just hadn't lived life long enough, or hadn't really been out, into the community, whatever. But I think having read her autobiography and then Alone Atop the Hill, the thing that I appreciate now is that as I read, I see we can relate now because you've lived, life has hit you, you've experienced some of these things, and now I can understand Mother Alice, some of her stories. I could not understand them to the impact that I understand now, but I can now as a mature adult.
Now, did you ever get the sense that she was famous?
As a kid, I thought she was, because when you walked into her house, she had what I call a wall of fame. She had so many pictures and certificates and awards, and you'd see President Johnson and President Kennedy. You just saw all these pictures, and Truman, and you saw President Eisenhower's wife, and she had many stories because they were friends. And I knew she was famous, but not to the degree that I know now. But as a kid, I knew something was going on. And then she traveled a lot. She traveled a lot, and so she would bring back artifacts. And she had like a curio display of dolls that she had collected as she traveled. I know Haiti was one place, and different places. But I just didn't understand how famous she was. But recently, in looking at the Carol's book, I really walked away saying she really was before her time. She really was.
She was before her time.
Mm-hmm. And even though, we often, now I have to just speak for my generation, civil rights, we know that it was going on, I'll say forever in a sense. But the 60s, most people hone in on that. But she was pre-civil rights. And that so the things that she accomplished just really made her before her time. And I'm not even sure the impact that she would have had a much greater impact perhaps if her highlight was really the 60s, but she was just before her time. And I think that's why she's just in recent years, I'm not talking about 5 years, but just in recent 20, 30 years, just recently begun to be a focus for researchers and people just wanted to continue the history.
Now, Carol, as you were going through the process of bringing Alice's words back to life, what sense did you get that she was always prescient about, like you were saying, being ahead of her time, that she could see a moment that hardly anyone else around her was aware of, or even gave her credit for being able to accomplish for her race, for women, as she stated in the quote that I read from the book? How much sense did you get that she knew she was working for the ages?
Well, she knew the way the world should be. She knew when she saw something that wasn't right. Like when she tried to cover a story in the House of Representatives and found that she couldn't get into the press gallery, and then found out that you had to work for a weekly newspaper. She saw things that were wrong, and she set about to right them. Now, Louis Lautier, who had been with the other news service, the National, you all know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
The other one. The other
Associated
one, not
Negro Press and the NMPA.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he had applied, but then they gave up. And her boss, Claude Barnett, gave up. She saw it wasn't right. And she saw where she had to be to do her job. And she just kept at it. And then she gets the rules changed. Her boss, Claude Barnett, didn't see it. He didn't think she'd be admitted, and he didn't even send in the letter of recommendation for her until she said, "What's going on here? Louis Lautier has been admitted, and I'm the one who made all the fuss and got the rules changed." And so then he sends in the letter of recommendation. And then after that experience, she goes to the White House herself, and she doesn't ask for any help from her publisher. She goes right in and she says to Truman's press secretary, I've just been admitted to the House and Senate press galleries. Now, what are you going to do? and he said, well, no problem. Send a letter. And she sends the letter, and she's admitted as the first woman. And she's recognized at the news conferences until she really ticks off Eisenhower because he didn't want to be bothered with civil rights. He didn't want questions on that. And so after a few times when she's recognized, a few times a year, but that's all you can expect with that kind of a crowd. But then he ices her out, and then Ethel Payne comes a few years later from the Chicago Defender, and they work out a plan where we'll both ask civil rights questions, and maybe one of us will be recognized. Well, Eisenhower catches on to that, and then he doesn't call on Ethel anymore, and Ethel gives up and says, well, I'm not going to waste my time. Alice hung in there, and I think the visionary part comes in there, too. You don't hang in when you know it's futile. She hung in there because she knew eventually it would change. And, of course, eventually it did.
Hence that awareness that she was working for the ages and for posterity. Yeah. Great perseverance. I think that's one of the major words, characteristics you have to take away from Alice's life. Yes, she persisted, and one of her greatest virtues was perseverance through everything in a personal life as well as her professional life. She's a sweet lady, if you ever met her. I met her at my husband's office at one of his Jet Magazine's famous Christmas parties. And she was just sitting next to somebody else along the library there in the big conference room. And she had such bearing that you knew she was somebody. So I said to my husband's secretary, who is that? And she answered in almost reverential tone, that's Alice Dunnigan. She was highly respected. My husband, in fact, called her Grandmother Dunnigan, and that was a term of great respect. Now, Amanda, as you're in Kentucky, where Alice came from and is revered. Can you talk about the responses of the folks in her native Kentucky to the legacy that she has created?
Oh my goodness, the response in Kentucky has been simply overwhelming. It surprised me. Although I will say that part of our desire for this project was to introduce or reintroduce her to the people of Kentucky and to the nation, because I do feel like she was somewhat of an unsung hero among the population at large. I think in journalism, she has been a rock star for a long time, but among us regular Americans, she was somewhat unknown, and we sought to change that. We felt like she's the kind of hero we need, and we wanted to convey that to Kentuckians and also to the rest of the nation and the world. And we appreciate the opportunity. I feel like I'm really speaking on behalf of her community in Russellville, and I know we have some people from Russellville here. Michael Morrow has dedicated years, decades. I don't know if Michael is in the audience. I hope so. He has dedicated decades of his life to researching and trying to assist in having people know her accomplishments. And without her community in Russellville, I don't think I would have fully understood what we needed to convey. And I appreciate them very much. So,
well, Michael, are you here? So
yes.
I guess that raises the question.
There he is.
Would you stand, sir? Would you like to say anything about her significance in Russellville?
I'd just like to say that when I first heard of him, I grew up in
There you go.
Got a mic for you there.
I said I never heard anything about her, and her great nephew gave me a book about her. And I read the book and I said, oh my God, it just shocked me that somebody like that could come from my community and we not learn about it in the schools and stuff.
Exactly.
So since then, I just started trying to get people to know who she was.
That is awesome. Thank you. So I'm hearing a lot of pluck and courage. That seems to be the hallmark of Alice Dunnigan. Soria, can you share with us her temperament, her personal bearing, not just as your grandmother, but also in all the dimensions that you've gotten to know her as?
One of the things that she described in terms when she got her initial accreditation, she talked about the perseverance, the persistence, the strenuous preparation that she had gone through, and how her ability was proven. But when she also said that she put a heroic fight to obtain the things that she did. She could not give up. And in a sense, I guess I'm a little spiritual here, but when I think of that, I think about how Queen Esther, when she was going before the king, she said, if I perish, I perish. And in the way my grandmother said, whatever it takes. If I'm a martyr for my community, that's what I'll do. And what I saw was assertiveness, but not aggression. And I felt like I've only known an even-tempered woman. And I think sometimes people can say things. One person can say it and it's not received, but someone of my grandmother's temperament could say it and it be received, because she could say it with a tone that was acceptable. You got the message, but it wasn't. People in this day and time call it nice nasty.
So you're saying your grandmother was nice nasty?
I think that she demanded a respect that she was going to get, even though there were, inequalities and all of that. But she persevered and pressed through, and it probably didn't. It mattered, but it didn't matter. If you weren't with her, she was going to go forward. So I think she was one of these people. If you're with me, fine. But if not, I have to progress on. And one of the things I did take from her is she often said that what she did was for the generation behind. And so as a person in her world, young person in her world, I think that puts something in us. Whatever we do, it has to be for the people behind us. So even her getting her accolades and everything, it was for her, but it was really for me, a journalist that was coming forward. It's for my niece, who's a journalist, who's coming forward. So I think that's the temperament.
So in essence, she did not play.
She didn't. She was really sweet. She was.
Now, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the examples that this wonderful personality, examples of her experiences that reflect this wonderful personality that she had from each of you. And then after that, we'll open it so the audience can ask some questions too. Who wants to go first, Carol or?
Well, I think one of the great advantages we have today with our technology, going back not that long, but long enough, we have Alice's voice.
Yes.
We can hear her actual voice. One of my favorite things is on the Kennedy Library website. You go to President John F. Kennedy's first news conference, and you pull that up, the audio of it, and about 8 minutes in, Alice is the first female reporter to be recognized to ask a question. And you hear this lovely Kentucky drawl, a sweet voice, and she says, "Mr. President, what are you going to do about the black Kentucky farmers who dared to vote in the last election and have lost their farms and have been living in tents as a result of that?" And it is just the sweetest voice. And Kennedy comes back with a real answer, and not like she would have gotten or had gotten at times from Eisenhower. No, why don't you take that to the Secretary of Agriculture, would have been probably what Eisenhower would have said. Kennedy comes back and says the Justice Department is on it, and we're going to take care of that. And then there's also an interview that she did with an oral library, I forget which one now, but where she goes all through these experiences, and you can hear her talk about it in her own words. And I think that's fabulous. You can really get a sense of the woman herself.
Do you think that that's a result of how meticulous she was about maintaining records, quotes, experiences, documentation for posterity's sake? She seemed to be thorough about saving information for the ages.
She must have been, because when she finally retired after the Nixon administration began, she set about to write her memoir, and it is 676 pages, and it is chock full of history and very meticulous. And then if you go look at her papers at the Howard University, fantastic collection. And then a lot of her photographs are down at Emory University. And she collected things for posterity. It had to be to preserve the history. And it's a period in history where a lot of us today, we don't know much about that era, the Truman era. And I think one of the reasons Alice is not better known is because the civil rights movement that came in after, with Kennedy was really a tsunami. Mm-hmm. And you have so many people exploding on the scenes, from sit-ins to journalists to, everything you could think of. And there's Alice, it's forgotten. So I like to give a lot of credit to Sonia and the NABJ for the award that night in 2013 when her book was projected on the screen, and several reporters like Dorothy Gilliam, I think Jackie Trescott might have been one, and they talked about her life. And I was so thrilled that night to hear that. I mean, I was thrilled for my husband, but I was also thrilled for Alice. And I knew about his book, which just came out then. And I knew she had written a book. They mocked her book when it first came out. Not the serious critics. She had a wonderful review in the Baltimore Afro-American. But the guys were a little jealous. And the name of the book was From the Schoolhouse to the White House, The Experiences of Black Women. So they mocked it and said, from the outhouse to the White House. Yeah. So I give you a lot of credit, and you beat me to it, but I wanted to recognize Michael.
Oh, sorry about that.
I never met you, but I wanted to, and I made it a point I was going to do that today, because some of the most beautiful articles, there's one very long, beautiful one on the internet, written by Mr. Morrow about Alice Dunnigan. And he came here to Washington and talked to Robert Dunnigan and interviewed him about his mother. He did a lot of work when nobody was paying any attention, and kept that alive. So somebody's got to remember you, or you'll be lost forever.
That's very true. No true word spoken. Did you all want to share what you would say is of any of her experiences that define her for you?
I'll add something, or I'll wait for you, either one. I think Alice Dunnigan had a true sense of her place her place as a black woman, as a woman, and her place in history. And I know she might not have been as prevalent during the tsunami of the 60s, but she certainly could have sparked some of that. And I think that the work that she did and accomplished leading up to the 60s is quite significant. And I will say, I think she did have a good sense of her place, and it was very different than what other people thought her place was supposed to be. And she did not let that deter her vision. And just as an overarching feeling about this entire experience, it has been that I do believe that people are quick to let you know where your place is supposed to be, especially those who have been marginalized. And it takes someone like Alice Dunnigan to understand her true place, even when it contradicts what the commonly accepted social view would be of that. So,
right. Soria?
I'm processing what you said, and I'm in agreement with what you said. And the thing that, as a young person, the thing that she left with me concerning, like what you just said, she really honed in that you have to be prepared, and you have to, even though when Claude Barnett did not allow her, or did not work with her to get her credentials, she followed protocol, and she understood protocol. So I think that she did understand her place, but she knew also, there's a protocol I must follow. And in doing that, she just was a woman of order, I think, I would say. And when she had done her best, and in her words, that heroic fight that she put forth, she knew that if she had done her homework and gone through all the hoops that she was supposed to go through, I think that there was a humility that she walked in. And but at the same time, that humility, when she got her accreditation, it let her know, yes, I did deserve it, because I did everything I was supposed to do. I went above and beyond, really, for some of what I did to get the recognition that would not have been given to her had she not done it orderly, in an orderly fashion, and kept the standards and done exactly what they said and beyond what they said. And like she said, unproven work, proven work, just proven. You can look and say, there's nothing we can do but give her what she's asking for.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know about you all in the audience, but the more I hear about this lady, the greater she becomes to me, just in terms of the wonderful things that she did. So does anyone in the audience have a question that, already, okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Natasha Alford, and I am deputy editor of thegrio.com. So I am a young black female journalist, an ABJ Emerging Journalist of the Year. And being here today is a moment that is so moving and inspirational to know that everybody would be in this room for Alice Dunnigan, and the work that she's done gives me hope. My question, particularly for her granddaughter, is what do you think how can young black female journalists carry her legacy forward? What do you think the lessons would be for us, particularly at this time when women like April Ryan and Abby Phillip, we are holding down the fort in difficult times?
I think that she would say, continue, keep the fight. And in her words, a heroic fight. Fight to the end, do everything that you can, thinking about the generation behind you, thinking about what you can leave them, because you're still paving a way. You're still a pioneer, and particularly in this day and time with technology and so on and so forth, you're paving the way for the young people coming behind us. And she talked about being prepared. She talked about being persistent, persevering. Those things still work. And so it's just the fight continues. I know if she were here today, she would say we've made some crossroads, some inroads, but there's still a lot more to be done. And so we have to find our little niches and follow our hearts and do that craft it to meet your need, to meet the generation to come. So be true to your calling, but be prepared.
Next question. Well, while we wait for questioners, one thing Alice did say in her book, and it's very simple, is she talked about how she was well aware of the significance of obtaining a press credential and going to the White House and covering the presidency. She said she never could have imagined that this was the great thing that she would do. She also said, neither could I ever have imagined the many experiences, both pleasant and unpleasant, that would come my way. Now, we've got pretty good documentation of some of the pleasantries of her work. Carol, can you share some of the unpleasantries? And I recall there was one incident in 1948, after she had gone through everything she went through to get accredited, to get the funds to travel on President Truman's campaign tour. And she's out there covering the news, first black woman on the campaign trail like that. And something happened to her.
I think it was out in Cheyenne.
Yes.
Was it Cheyenne, Wyoming? Or maybe not. There's something good.
Cheyenne.
It was Cheyenne. Mm-hmm. She's walking along with the press corps. They're behind the limousine. The governor's limousine picks up Truman. And all the press has to follow, walking along, short route to the governor's mansion. And a military guard, military were lining the streets, steps out and grabs her shoulder and tries to push her back and says, "Get back with the crowd, you don't belong here." And Alice just keeps right on going. And a white reporter from a Tennessee newspaper said to leave her alone. You don't know who you're messing with. She's a member of the president's
press corps.
Yeah. And Alice, she just took it, but it was horrible. Mm-hmm. And everybody else was very embarrassed about it and told her how awful it was. And Alice took the punches as they came, and she had gotten used to the hard knocks back home in Kentucky as a teacher. So she's in the car, her car on the train. At the end of the day, a couple of days later, And she takes off her shoes, and you know how the seats are facing each other in the car, the private little car you have. And she puts up her feet, and she puts the typewriter on her lap, and she starts typing away. And there's a little knock, knock on the door, and the door opens, and it's the President of the United States. And she knows you're supposed to stand when the President walks in, but she can't move because she's got a typewriter. You know how big they were in those days. Even the ones you traveled with were pretty heavy. And she says, "Oh, Mr. President, Mr. President." That's all she could say, "Mr. President." And he asks her if she's being treated okay. And she says, "Oh, yes." And he says, "No, you're not. I heard what happened. And if anything happens again, you let my people know, and we'll take care of it." But what she took away from that was very interesting. She said after that, she would never really be bowled over or awed by anybody again. The President of the United States had come in and talked to her as a professional, and it was great. That was a very good, bad experience that turned good.
It turned good. And I think probably by the end of that tour, at one point she was partying with the press secretary. I think he made sure she was seated at an appropriate table at a reception or party of some kind, and some of the other press weren't there, and they said, "Oh, they want to know, Alice, how you're feeling." And she said, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine." And at that party. Are there any other questions from the audience? None? Okay. Well, I'd like for each of you to have a few closing thoughts about Mrs. Dunnigan. If you had to choose the takeaway from today and the significance of her presence here in the museum, what would you say people should take away from this experience today?
Well, I don't know any woman who has read this book who hasn't come away with a feeling of inspiration, a feeling of whatever I'm facing in my life, whether it's personal, we didn't even get to the two very unfortunate marriages, whether it's professional, school teacher, journalist, whatever it is, look what she did. And she was not, would you say, an extraordinary woman. She was a woman, flesh and blood, like everybody else here. Mm-hmm. What she did was extraordinary. Her accomplishments were extraordinary. But she wasn't Wonder Woman. And so when you read that story, you get the feeling of, yes, I can. Mm-hmm. And that's the wonderful thing about this story. And the fact that I did not write the book makes me feel great, because I can brag that this is Alice's book. It's her words. Mm-hmm. There's nobody else taking her material and doing it over in their own mindset. This is Alice Dunnigan in her own words. And that's what made it such a joy. And if you read it, and then you go online and you hear her actual voice, right, you can feel like you know Alice Dunnigan.
And I'll just add to that. She really was a visionary. She could see a future where equality existed. And I don't think she ever lost sight of that vision. And the takeaway that I would want is for other people to also have that vision, and to not just support and admire her, although that should happen as well, but to be inspired and to do something about seeing a common vision of equality. So that would be my takeaway, and that is to see, to be inspired, and to do.
So, yeah.
My vision is just, I would just say her vision. And what I take away of this is just persevere, never give up. Never give up. And remember, the more you do, the more you accomplish, the more self-esteem you'll have. But whatever you're doing, it's not just for you, it's for those behind you. And I know that's what she wanted to leave with the young people.
Okay. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for this amazing discussion. Now, before we completely wrap for today, we wanted to give Mrs. Dunnigan's granddaughter, Alicia, are you here? A chance to say a few words. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon. I hope I won't stumble through this too much. I had to make some last-minute additions and things, so please be patient and bear with me. My name is Alicia Dunnigan, and I'm the eldest grandchild of Alice Dunnigan. On behalf of my siblings, Suzette Dunnigan White, Kevin Dunnigan, and Soria, Brandon Dunnigan, all of whom are here today, as you see, and on behalf of my daughter Danielle Dunnigan, who could not be here, I would like to thank each and every one assembled here today. We also would like to especially thank those who played a part in bringing Allison Dunnigan to the forefront today at the museum. Thank you, John Maynard, for the numerous emails, and phone calls to Suzette while planning this event. We thank you and the museum staff for their curation of the exhibit and for their creation of this panel and forum. Thank you, Sonia Ross, for the part you played in the recognition of our grandmother by the National Association of Black Journalists. Thank you so much. Thank you, Amanda Matthews, for your artistry, dedication, and vision in transforming images of our grandmother into a beautiful bronze statue that will endure for generations. Thank you, Carol Booker, for your hard work and dedication in condensing and editing our grandmother's book and republishing it in order to make her story more relevant and accessible to current and successive generations. A special thank you to Michael Morrow of the West Kentucky African American Museum and Research Center. Thank you so much for your over 30 years of dedication in attempting to make our grandmother as well known as other civil rights figures in the country. Thank you so much for that, and your efforts are paying off. Thank you so much. We also want to thank Deborah Ketchum-Smith and Sigma Gamma Rho sorority for your presence here today. And thank you, Soria, for representing us on the panel and in so many interviews today. We owe you a dinner, probably lunch, breakfast, a whole lot of stuff. You will be rewarded, okay? Trust me. This is a momentous occasion for us, but there is some sadness in this occasion because our dear cousin Cheryl Allison Alexander, who was scheduled to be here in celebration with us, lost her life in a tragic accident just last week. We want to extend our sincere love and appreciation and condolences to her son Jason and to her brothers and sisters, especially those in attendance here today. Where is? Yes. Okay. Their strong love, faith, and courage has allowed them to be here, even in the midst of their painful loss, and we treasure their presence here today. Yes. In closing, I would like to say that even as direct descendants, we will forever stand in awe at the person that was our grandmother, the fearless, relentless journalist, the ardent civil rights advocate, the crusader who dared to speak truth to power. But we remember her most as our beloved grandmother. And she was sweet. She was. She really was. Maybe she reserved most of her sweetness for us. The Alice Dunnigan we knew was warm, loving, gentle, and wise. She would always be there for each and every one of us to offer us love, support, and temporary housing when necessary, and pearls of wisdom and encouragement along with hugs and some of the best home-cooked Southern food you have ever tasted in your life. No joke, no joke. I especially miss that buttermilk cornbread made from scratch and cooked on top of the stove in an old cast iron skillet. She has skills. Let me tell you, she has skills. I'm getting hungry, so I got to stop. That's all. And finally, considering, and especially because of you, young lady, when you were talking out there, considering the current political climate in our country today, we know our beloved grandmother would want us to give a few words of encouragement on her behalf to all the journalists and aspiring journalists assembled here today who follow in her footsteps. She would tell you to keep pushing. Keep confronting and riling those in authority. Keep demanding to be heard, even when those in power may choose to ignore, revile, and threaten you. She would tell you that your communities and this nation still desperately need you just as much as they did in her time, to keep asking the tough questions, to continue to shine the light on injustices, and to continue to bring truth to the masses. The free press is not the enemy of the people. The free press is exactly the opposite. It is fundamental to the functioning of a true democratic society. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Did anyone else want to share? It's hard to follow that. If not, thank you so much for being here, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.